Hi folks, welcome back to my channel. A couple of weeks ago I put a video up on an evening that I had photographing the North American Nebula, and I mentioned in that video that I was hoping to make a significantly better image than I had when I'd done a previous attempt at this target 2 years ago. And one of the reasons that I was hoping to achieve that was a little bit of a step up in my technical knowledge associated with being able to remove stars from the image and prevent them from bloating. And this was achieved through my stumbling across a free software package called Starnet++. And I said in that video that I hope to do a little tutorial on how to use Starnet++ in order to allow you to make this same step up as me. Now, the problem with processing astro images is what you're trying to do is to bring out faint nebula or faint galaxies out of the picture, but in doing so you kind of exaggerate the stars, if you like, and you make them bloat, and this can mean that the stars begin to overwhelm the image. So the idea of Starnet++ is it takes your image out of your stacking program. It then removes the stars from that image and just leaves you with an image containing, in my case, the North American Nebula or whatever target you're aiming for. You can then process that starless image to your heart's content without risk of overemphasizing the stars, if you like. And then the trick then is to go into Photoshop once you've done that and put the stars back in at whatever level of intensity that you want. And this is the process that we'll go through today. So yeah, I hope you'll join me for this video. My name's John and I make videos on camping, walking and astronomy. If you like what you see in this video, then please check my channel out, as you may find others that interest you there. But in the meantime, let's crack on with this video. So the first thing you want to do is to go into your search engine and search for Starnet++, and it should come up at the top with an option to download it from sourceforge.net. You click on that and click the download button, and once the download is done you've unzipped the files and stuff, you should see a little folder appear on your desktop called Starnet_win, and if you open that up you get another folder in there, and within there are a load of files that will run the application, including, importantly, some batch files. You'll see what's important about that a little bit later. Those of you who saw my video on the North American Nebula might remember that I took, I think, 90 1-minute exposures and stacked those in Sequitur. And what you want to do now is to take the result of that stacking process, the 16-bit TIFF file, and in this case you can see it here. This has come out of Sequitur, and this is the image that we want to slightly manipulate in order to bring the nebula out a little bit before we go into Starnet. So to do this, we go into Photoshop and load up that file and just do a couple of quick stretch and level adjustments, just to the extent that we can start seeing the nebula become visible, which would give the Starnet program half a chance of differentiating nebula from stars. The intention in this video isn't to go in detail through the processing methods used, levels, curves, adjustments, that sort of thing. For those of you that are interested, if you're not familiar with these concepts, I've done a little video stacking and processing for absolute beginners, and I'll put a link in the description below this video. But what we're doing now is just trying to get the nebula to come out of the image that I got from Sequitur, and you can see here that it's beginning to become visible, but at the cost of seeing more and more and more stars in the image. So I'm just doing a final couple of tweaks now, and once I've got the image to a point that I'm happy with, I'm going to save it, and in this case I'm going to call it North America 1. And you can see here that the nebula is perfectly visible, but there are loads and loads of stars in this image that if I carried on the processing in this way, those stars would overwhelm the image. So having done that, we now want to open up the little folder on our desktop called starnet_win and open up the subfolder that you find in there where you'll see all the files listed, and drag in the picture that you took, in my case North America 1, into that folder. So now looking at the contents of this folder, you'll see there is an application called RGB Starnet++, and that's for running RGB images like that comes off my DSLR camera. There's also another application called mono_starnet++ for doing mono images, but the one that we're interested in is the RGB Starnet++ file. What it's important to note at this point is that there are a couple of Windows batch files in this folder, one of which is called run RGB Starnet, and it's this batch file that contains the commands when you click on the application that will make Starnet++ do its job. What I didn't realise when I first ran this was that this batch file is looking for a specific image file called RGB_test5, upon which it will run its magic. And what this means is that you have to rename the image that you brought into the folder to RGB_test5, which is what I'm doing here. The alternative to this approach, I believe, is to go into the command prompt on your computer and modify the batch file so that it looks for the image title that you originally gave the image, in my case North America 1. But I just think it's easier to rename your image to RGB_test5. And once you've done this, you'll see the files get rearranged and the image RGB test5 sits right underneath the RGB application. So here we are, we've now got this image RGB_test5, which contains a faint nebula and rather too many stars for my liking. So this is what we're going to allow Starnet++ to do its work on. So what you now do is click on your RGB test5 image and lift it up and hover it over the RGB Starnet application. And when you release the mouse button, that will automatically start the batch file running that will do the processing for you. At this point, you really want to go away and make yourself a cup of tea, because this is quite a long process. The program's doing a lot of work, and I found that on my image this took probably about 10 minutes or so. So yeah, time to go and make a cup of tea. So it's 10 minutes later and the program's pretty well finished doing its job. And once it's done that, if you go back into the Starnet folder, you'll notice that there's a new image appeared called Starless. So now you keep your fingers crossed and open up that image Starless and hope for the best. And as you can see here, the program has successfully removed all of the stars and just left me with the nebula. So the program has done a pretty good job. There are a few artifacts in there that if you were producing a pure starless image, you might want to consider getting rid of. But I'm going to look at those a little bit later on, probably once I've put the stars back in. So we've now got two images, one of them RGB_test5, which is the full image with stars and nebula, and the other is called Starless, which only contains the nebula. And apart from the stars, in all other respects, these images are absolutely identical. So the next step now is to go back into Photoshop and call up both images, the starless image and the image with the nebula and the stars. So having selected the image with the stars and the nebula, click on Image and then Apply Image, and a new dialog box will open. So in this dialog box, where it says Source, you want to change that to the starless file. And where it says Blending, you want to scroll down the list and click Subtract. The only other thing to change in this dialog box is the offset number, which relates to the darkness of the sky, basically, 1 being pitch black. Mine seems to default to 6. I make that 10 in my one, but I'd have to experiment more to see what effect it really has. So now if you click OK, what the program will do is it will take the two images, one with the nebula and one with the nebula and the stars, and subtract the nebula from the one with the nebula and the stars, just leaving you with an image full of stars. So what we're left with at the end of this is two images, one purely the nebula on its own and one purely the stars on its own. And here they both are in Photoshop, freely selectable from one to the other. So now that part of the process is complete, what we can do is select the image of the nebula and process that in the same way that we'd process any other astro picture. So you'd do levels adjustments, curves adjustments, mess around with the saturation, perhaps change the color balance, all that kind of thing. You now do on this image of the nebula. And the great thing is that because there are no stars in there to get bloated, you can bring out the nebula as best you can without causing the image to be overwhelmed by stars becoming more and more prevalent. So this is what I'm going to be doing here. And as I said before, I don't intend this to be a how I do my astro processing tutorial. That is covered on the other video that I've linked in the description. While doing the processing on this image, what I decided to do was to make the image a little bit redder than the one that I produced from the same data a couple of weeks ago, and up the temperature slightly, just because I fancied doing it really. And that's one of the great things about astrophotography. There kind of is no right and wrong as to how the image ends up looking. It's what makes you happy that's important at the end of the day. So what we're left with is a processed nebula and a starless image. The next step's to select the starless image and go to the layer and unlock it. Having unlocked the layer, you can then go and select it and press Ctrl+C, which will copy that layer. Now select your starless image and unlock the layer on that image. With the layer selected, now press Ctrl+V, which will paste the stars layer above the starless one. Now click on the box that says Normal and another menu will appear. As you scroll up and down through the options, you'll see your image changing in the main window. And I've picked the one that says Linear Dodge Add. And this gives us a picture of the nebula with the stars overlaid on the top of it. And what you can now do is go to the opacity slider and put that backwards and forwards between 0 and 100% until you get stars intensity that suits what you're after. So after a bit of faffing about backwards and forwards, I opted for about the 30% opacity, which meant the stars were significantly subdued. I then flattened the layers down to end up with an image with a single layer, and then saved that as a file that I decided to call combined, because I'd combined the nebula and the stars into one image. I had some bad stars on the left hand side of this image though, caused by me not using the right field flattener for my telescope. So I wanted to crop out that left hand side and then have a proper little look at the stars. So a final round of tweaking, a little bit of cropping and a little bit of fiddling around with the colours, and I'd got really the image that I think I was happy with. Bit of pixel peeking looking at the stars followed, and I'd still got some distortions towards the edges of my picture caused by this dodgy backspacing that I was using. But overall the roundness of the stars and the intensity of the stars wasn't too bad, and I was quite pleased really with what I'd got. Given that I'm not trying to win any awards or anything, and this was the image that was more or less my starting point, where the stars were threatening to overwhelm the image, and certainly would have done so had I carried on trying to get the nebula out, I think this was relatively successful all round. So I'll put the final image up in a tick. But yeah, considering Starnet++ is a free program, it delivers amazing results, and you can dabble about with it without it costing you anything, which is always a good thing. For me, I think I had a couple of weeks where it was kind of stop-start in my progress with it. I thought I wasn't going to be able to use it. I thought maybe something wrong with my file or something. But once I realised that you needed to name your image RGB_test5, that was pretty well that sorted. As I say, the alternative is to actually go into the command file and modify that to suit the name of the file that you're using. So that was the first sort of hurdle overcome. Come on in. I also realised eventually that once you've got your two images, the image with or the RGB test 5 image with the stars and the nebula, and just the nebula, that you shouldn't process the nebula picture at that point, because it needs to be identical to the one including the stars and the nebula, so that the subtraction takes place correctly and you're just left with the stars. So that was another little stumbling point that I came across. And the final thing was not to do any cropping on the image until you've combined the stars and the nebula images back together again, because otherwise Photoshop doesn't know what's going on if you've got images of two different scales. So I had like a little series of stumbling blocks that took me a couple of weeks to kind of get over and understand. But if you do things in exactly the order that I've shown in this video, then yeah, all of that will go away. So yeah, I'm looking forward to using Starnet++ a lot more. It particularly lends itself to images where there are loads of stars and a nebula. And this is particularly the case for summer objects, the Veil Nebula, for example, and the Crescent Nebula. It's very hard to get the nebula out without the stars drowning them out. But I shall be using it on galaxy pictures and stuff like that across the winter. So yeah, hope you've found the video useful. Hope you do a little download and a play about for yourself. You've got nothing to lose at the end of the day. It's free. And now I'll put the final image up, which I'm actually quite pleased with. I can't decide whether I prefer this slightly redder version over the one that I put up a couple of weeks ago. So I'm still umming and ahhing over that one. But I hope you like the image anyway, and I shall see you again next time. Cheerio.